On March 30th, I had my video recording with my client with Broca's aphasia. He's 49 years old and suffered a left CVA 11 years ago, which resulted in his Broca's aphasia. My client's aphasia is non-fluent, and he has difficulty with producing grammatically correct utterances, using appropriate intonation patterns, word retrieval, appropriate preposition and pronoun usage at the word and sentence level, and producing complex sentences with proper syntax. His receptive language skills appear to be within normal limits, as he understands and follows directions, and answers questions and contributes appropriately in conversation. The treatment that I used during my videotape session was based off an article known as Treatment and Generalization of Complex Sentence Production in Agrammatism. The article presents linguistic-specific treatment and its application to examine the acquisition and generalization of complex sentence production in agrammatism. Agrammatism is a symptom of Broca's aphasia in which individuals have difficulty producing complex sentence structures. Linguistic-specific treatment is used to train construction and production of complex sentence structures. This article and other research pertaining to LST has provided support that LST can be used for clients to generalize complex sentence production. My session goal for my videotape session was that the client will produce a grammatically correct complex sentence during a sentence transformation task with 70% accuracy with modeling and visual cues. For the videotape session, the client was given stimuli that involves cleft sentence production. So for example, it was the thief who the artist chased is a cleft sentence. Each stimuli contained picture pairs that involve transitive verbs and two participants. For example, the two sentences, the artist chased the thief, and the thief chased the artist. The client was shown 8 selected picture pairs from one set. Cards with written words were made to identify the nouns and verbs in each picture pair, with the nouns being placed above and the verb being placed below the picture. The clinician displayed the active sentence with word and phrase cards and identified the verb and thematic rows and demonstrated how to construct the target sentence structure using word and phrase cards. Then the participant produced the target sentence and identified the verb and thematic rows and constructed and produced the target sentence and identified again the verbs and thematic rows. For each picture pair, the clinician modeled the first sentence structure for the client. The clinician also provided feedback and gave verbal and visual cues to elicit the correct response. Overall, when I was looking back at the video and reflecting on how the session went, I could see a dramatic change in the activity as we went through our first 3 or 4 items. Before the session, my main problem was giving clear instruction to my client, and I had a problem formulating what I wanted to tell him, what I needed him to do during this activity. And so during the session, I felt like I was clear and concise, and I finally was able to give him clear instruction. By looking at the video footage, what I could tell that really changed during the activity was the body language of my client. In the beginning, when I was giving him the instruction of what was needed to be done during the activity, he had his arms folded, he was sitting back, he was looking around the room when I was giving him the instruction, which was something that I didn't notice until I was watching the video afterwards. If there is anything that I could change to help his understanding at the beginning of the activity, it would just provide less instruction, because I felt like I was rambling about the activity for a little bit. And so by me explaining and just keep talking about the activity and what was needed for him to do, it was kind of turning him off from it. And my client historically has shown a practice effect in which we go straight into the activity. The first few items will be a little difficult for him, and as we progress, he gets better and he becomes more confident. And I should have taken that into consideration. There was a moment in the session where my client asked why. Why are we doing this? And I responded by not giving the rationale that was inside the research article that was hard to understand, but I told him that we're working on creating longer, more complex sentence structures. And so by doing so, maybe by working on the hardest sentence structures, it will help us produce even the easier ones, which he accepted, and his body language started to change as we went along with the items. During the session, there was a lot of moving around of different index cards that represented the sentences that we were using, and in index cards that labeled the picture pairs throughout the activity. And so my client ended up telling me that he enjoyed being able to move around these index cards with the words, because him being able to visualize everything really helped with him expressing what was going on in the photos. For example, one of the items that we had during the activity was of a boy painting a girl and a girl painting a boy. And the active sentence was, it was the boy who painted the girl. And the targeted sentence was, it was the girl who painted the boy. The client had different index cards that segmented the sentence so that he would be able to switch the cards around and create a new one. So it was the boy who painted the girl could turn into it was the girl who painted the boy. And that was a nice complex sentence that he had to reformulate. One of the biggest changes that I saw throughout the session as we were looking at the video footage was the change in nonverbal communication between me and my client. So in the beginning, with my client's arms folded, he was sitting back and looking around the room. I didn't notice that he wasn't even looking at me, and I'm not even too sure if he was paying attention to my instruction after a certain period of time. But as we dipped in and we were doing all the different items together, and I was providing the models, and he was getting a good understanding of what was needed from him, eye contact increased a whole lot more. His body language, like I said before, changed, but he was leaning forward now, and I was leaning forward, so we were pretty close to each other. He was very relaxed, and I became more relaxed as the activity progressed. And so I felt like with those changes, it really showed how much the client really began to like the activity, but how much he trusted me and I trusted him as well, which was really important. After the third item and after he started to warm up and have that practice effect with those first few items, he really became very enthusiastic and lighthearted. And as a result, there was moments that we got off topic and he would look into the camera and he would wave hi. We would laugh and we would discuss the relevance of this activity, and he would also say how much he actually enjoyed this activity. And so I knew from there this was going to be an activity that would be successful today, and that's an activity that I could work with him in the future and make more difficult for him. One of the things that my client really enjoyed was the fact that I used emojis as the items in the activity, and he had a kick out of that. He really enjoyed that. And the reason why I used emojis was because when I was looking back at the research, I couldn't find the items that the researchers administered. And so I had to create my own, and I figured that emojis could be so simple if I use the right sentences. And so, for example, it was the girl who chased the boy. I was able to find a girl running emoji and a boy running emoji, and I would switch them up so that it could represent it was the girl who chased the boy, or it was the boy who chased the girl. And so he really enjoyed that, and he brought that up at one point too during the session. And I told him, I was like, yeah, you'll find those emojis right on your keyboard. When I was planning this activity prior to the videotape session, I personally thought this was going to be an activity that I did once, and I can go back to doing what I have been doing with my client. And so this videotape session really changed my mind and really made me think about hanging on to this activity and doing it in future sessions with my client. I think this activity has a lot of positives going for it. It's research-based. It's an activity that my client enjoyed a lot, and he stated that he enjoyed being able to visualize the cards or visualize the sentences into their segments and moving things around to change the meaning. And this is also an activity that can step up in terms of difficulty when my client is ready to move on. Overall, I think that this activity was very successful, and it gives me another option that I can use with my client because it's very relevant to what we've been doing this entire semester. If there was anything that would have changed about the session overall, it would have been at the beginning of the session where I was explaining everything to my client. I would have given shorter instructions to him and let him know that this was going to be an activity that him and I will be doing together, and things will get clearer as we go along. One thing that I noticed throughout the semester is that my client is a very visual learner. And so one thing I could have done was shown him a sample, and I would have modeled the targeted behavior for him, in which I would get a picture pair and I would label the subjects in the picture pair and the action. And then I would display the active sentence using the index cards, and I would show him how I would switch around the words so that I can create a new meaning. And I'll go back to the example with the boy painted the girl and the girl painted the boy. I would use those cards that segmented the sentence and restructure them for him. And so he would have one sample as a model, and I would still provide the model in the activity in the items. But instead of me going and giving him a 2-3 minute set of directions that he wasn't paying attention to or he wasn't interested in, I would have just provided him a model so he would have seen it, and then we would go straight in it, and I would assure him that we were doing this together. Another thing that I would have done would be branching up the difficulty during the session. Because one thing I did notice was that my client was labeling the subjects and the action very quickly, and he was also producing the target sentence. So one thing that I felt like I should have done was remove a cue during the activity to see how he would respond to that. One way I could have branched up and made the activity harder for him would be by taking away the labeling cards. Take away the cards that labeled the subjects and the cards that labeled the actions, and have him independently tell me who the subjects were in each sentence and what was the action being done in each sentence. Another thing that I could have done as well was take away the modeling portion of the activity. And so I would have him produce the active sentence and then produce the target sentence afterwards without him having that model. So then that example, it was the boy who painted the girl and it was the girl who painted the boy. He would have to say both of them instead of me providing the model of it was the boy who painted the girl and ask him to produce it was the girl who painted the boy. Although I didn't branch up during the activity, I will up the difficulty for my client to see how well he does. And I will also have a plan to branch up during the next session just in case my client is still excelling. One of the things that differentiates what I did in this activity with my client and the research is that the research says another thing that I can do is introduce a variety of different sentence types. In the session that I did with my client on March 30th, I focused solely on object clefs, whereas the research that I've done did object clefs, object extracted matrix, embedded questions, and embedded actives. In the research that I've done, the researchers had an extended period of time to introduce the different sentence types. In the sessions I'm with my client, I have about 15 to 20 minutes to introduce the sentence types with him. So I wouldn't be able to introduce all 4 in one session, but what I can do is introduce 2 at a time so that my client does see that variety. When planning this activity for future sessions, what I will do is take away some of the visual cues and the models away from my client. Another thing I will do as well is introduce the different sentence types to offer variety for my client. In terms of data collection, what I can do in the future is continue to see whether or not my client's labeling the subjects and the actions in the sentence and whether or not he can produce the target sentence or not. By increasing the difficulty and removing the various levels of cueing given to my client, I can see whether or not my client's making improvements as the difficulty increases. Another way of recording improvement is also by taking a language sample in times where we might be discussing either a summary of a video or discussing the plans for a weekend or how a weekend was and discuss and go further into detail and seeing whether or not my client is generalizing those skills in this specific activity to everyday conversations. Overall, I thought the activity was very successful. It was an activity that my client enjoyed, and this is an activity that I could mold around my client's needs to make it more functional for him and to increase the difficulty to make it harder for him so that he can excel. As well as the activity being evidence-based, one thing that really helped me out as well is the video recording. Me being able to see the client's body language, his reaction to the entire activity, and how that changed over a period of time really was beneficial. As well as me being able to pinpoint and recognize the client's body language to the activity, what really helped as well was looking at my own body language. I was extremely nervous during this activity, at least in the beginning, and I thought that the video recording was going to show how nervous I was. And I was surprised that it really didn't, but there were behaviors that I saw that I can change during future sessions. One of it being my rate of speech, which is something that I've worked to improve on this entire semester. And in times where I'm getting a little excited or I'm nervous, I tend to speak a lot faster. And that's something I didn't really recognize until I actually saw the video footage. And that's something that I'm going to continue to work on as we progress forward.